another Dagwood Reads. Hope y'all had a good week. We're still here in the studio messing around with things, trying to make it look good for the next phase here. Um, I've got a lot to say, so we're just going to get right into it. We are uh, we are reading chapter 12 uh, of The Importance of Being Ernest, the life of actor Jim Varney, written by his nephew Justin Lloyd. Well, okay, folks, let's just get right into it. All right, chapter 12, The Secret of Ernest's Success. Jim always told interviewers that Charlie Chaplin was his biggest influence when it came to Ernest. Jim said once, "Physical comedy is a comedy that works in any language," and Chaplin knew that. His success was based on the fact that he never opened his mouth to get a laugh. I think people like physical comedy, which is why cartoons are so successful. Another time, Jim said, "I try to make Ernest clownish and I don't want him too low key, and he's physically funny." Although they were eras apart, the two shared common traits. Both actors used their expressive faces to draw an audience in and evoke sympathy despite their mischievous ways. While Jim worked in the era of sound, like Chaplin, he still used his face to give expressions like ee hee hee, a cartoonish look. And like Chaplin, Jim was at his funniest when he didn't speak or barely did. In a courtroom scene of the movie Ernest Goes to Jail, Ernest, serving as a juror, tries to be as quiet as possible while dealing with a pen that explodes in his mouth. It's a funny scene. His attempts to use a piece of paper to soak up the I remember this scene. To soak up the ink only to make things worse. He becomes so frantic about hiding the mess that he resorts to eating the ink-soaked paper. In another commercial, Ernest inspects a bag of potato chips as he feels around, turning it on its side, looking more and more desperate as he examines it. At the very end, he realizes there are no chips left and cries, "All gone," before smashing the empty bag into his face. Ernest is literally left holding the bag. John Cherry admitted later that Jim had come up with much of the bit on the spot, leaving the crew cracking up. Even Chaplin's relationship with Max Sennett mirrored the one between Jim and John Cherry. Sennett, like Cherry, allowed his star to have quite a bit of creative input. Before Chaplin came along, Sennett's Keystone Film Company had introduced to the world the Keystone Cops, whose comic influence has been enormous. Movies like Police Academy and Smokey and the Bandit have carried on the Keystone formula through the years. Even the popular TV series Dukes of Hazzard features bumbling cops getting big laughs. The more arrogant the lawman, the more enjoyable for the audience to see him stumble. The same type of routine played out time and again in the Ernest commercials, where Ernest always pays a price for being so obnoxious to neighbor Vernon. Sennett's rival, Hal Roach, brought Laurel and Hardy to the big screen. Roach's slapstick masterpieces also shaped much of Jim's appreciation of comedy in his formative years. Jim often mentioned both Sennett and Roach when discussing his influences. Jim never felt playing the fool was beneath him. He took satisfaction in the fact that many actors would not be fearless enough to be so outrageous or look so silly. An actor the least bit obsessed with his or her looks would not want to see themselves close up in a wide-angle lens. He also thought he was excelling in a type of acting that was more difficult than many assumed. In a 1987 television interview with WKBW out of Buffalo, New York, Jim said, "You can do a dramatic scene 14 different ways. If you don't tell a joke the right way, if the punchline's timing is off, it's not funny." And that is true. Because the character of the fool had been so significant in many of Shakespeare's plays, Jim had a sense of pride carrying on the tradition, even if his fool was hawking ice cream on TV. Jim often mentioned his Shakespeare background when discussing the discipline it instilled in his acting. It assisted him in memorizing the multiple scripts he was responsible for in a single shooting day. Ernest writer Glenn Petach said once, Jim could look at a script for 10 minutes and have it memorized entirely. Another Ernest writer, Coke Sams, was equally amazed. He remembered it could be WWKD, WWJR, and then WWM. He would switch call letters. He could focus so completely that he allowed a level of production none of us had ever seen before or since, actually. Jim told the Daily Oklahoman in 1987, I could learn scripts faster than anybody alive. The skill proved valuable since cue cards were nearly impossible to use with Jim so close to the camera lens. Jim's gift for memorization gave him the ability to use his focus on finding ways to make every commercial funnier. Jim once offered a simplified explanation of the process of an Ernest commercial. It revealed how his brain had become hardwired to the formula. We've got just 30 seconds to do the pitch. Set up the punchline and then punch it. Actually, it takes 28.8 seconds. By now, I have a 30-second timer in my head. John Cherry was always complimentary of Jim's portrayal of Ernest. Even before the success of any of the Ernest movies, he told an advertising magazine, one of the reasons Jim is so good is because he gives you 100%. He would even compare Jim to Chaplin by describing the way Jim used his facial expressions to draw in an audience. No matter how much praise was showered upon Cherry for his role in the character's incarnation and success, he always said, if there wasn't a Jim Varney, there wouldn't be an Ernest at all. Well, I guess that goes without saying, huh? Let me hit this better. Although Chaplin provided Jim with much of his slapstick inspiration, some fans thought Ernest T. Bass' character from the Andy Griffith Show had provided the blueprint. Those fans may have been residents of North Carolina, home to both the fictional Mayberry and one of Ernest's first clients, Pine State Dairies. Although both characters share the same name and reflect hillbilly stereotypes, Ernest T. Bass was definitely not the inspiration, as discussed earlier. Ernest was based on a man who had worked with Cherry's father, the most obnoxious person Cherry had ever met. Jim easily adapted to the persona of the overbearing, know-it-all good old boy. Perhaps there was no better description of Ernest's resume than one made by Jim to a newspaper in 1985. He's an inventor. He crossbreeds small appliances and power tools. As far as Ernest's last name was concerned, Cherry said he got it from a former state treasurer of Tennessee. Cherry always thought that when someone said "whirl," it sounded like they had marbles in their mouth. Due to the limited budget in the beginning, he was decided that cameraman Jim May, reacting to Jim's movements with a handheld camera, would, in essence, play Vern. Writer Coke Sams recalled it was cheaper to throw a camera on some guy's shoulder, and it made the commercials more active. The arrangement became permanent, as it was evident the camera movements also added a more intimate feel, while the wide-angle lens magnified Jim's contorted facial expressions. Jim May occasionally received assistance, combined with dazzling special effects. Cherry sometimes served as Vern's voice, and writer Sams did everything from making many pancakes rain down on Ernest's head to kicking the ladder away from the roof in one of the most popular bits. From the beginning, Cherry's Nashville home served as command central. From piling film crews into bedrooms to utilize sections of the roof where Jim could be pushed off a ladder, Cherry regularly sacrificed his residence to provide a low cost, local looking shoot. The small production scale helped the film crew crank out multiple commercials a day. Cherry would have multiple sets prepared so the crew could immediately go to the next commercial. The whole thing was so efficient that filming 16 commercials a day became the norm. Wow, that's a lot. Because of the physicality in so much of Ernest's performances, injuries were always a danger. In one instance, Jim could have very well lost an eye. The commercial shows Ernest popping in on Vern while Vern plays darts. Oh yeah. Ernest stands directly in front of Vern, who would not mind using Ernest's nose for a bullseye. After a few lines during the filming, Jim and Sam's got out of sync, and Sam's threw a dart that whizzed within inches of Jim's face. The crew in the room fell silent. But Jim never backed away from doing everything he could do to make such each stunt as realistic as possible. The small, sickly kid who never lived up to the athletic expectations of his father was actually so successful at physical comedy because of his athleticism. Coke Sam's once said, with all the physical comedy, he was just ripped. He was one of those guys who was incredibly strong for his weight and size. In the ever-popular window slam bit, the small block that protected Jim's fingers sometimes prevented the window from landing without the right amount of force. Jim occasionally removed the block and endured the pain for the sake of comedy. Luckily, he never suffered a major injury beyond a chipped tooth and occasional bumps and bruises. The Ernest commercials never graduated to fancy sets or expensive effects. As Cherry once said, you're buying entertainment, not beautiful product shots. The focus was always Jim's performance. Beyond Jim's magic and Cherry's direction, it was the writers who provided the funny scripts and imaginative ideas that ended up winning countless awards. Cherry, one of the writers himself, was surrounded by an equally talented team for years. Coke Sam's, Dan Butler, Glenn Petach, Steve Leisure, and the late Gil Templeton. After displaying their talent for commercials, they went on to write for the Ernest characters as he moved into TV and movies. They proved that writers in Nashville could pen more than country songs. Much of the success of these projects was due to the collaboration between Cherry and Studio Productions, which later became Ruckus Films. Studio was founded in 1979 by Coke Sam's, Jim May, and Mary Matthews. Sam's took over some of the writing duties while May focused on cinematography. Their long tenure with Ernest made them an instrumental part of the character's success. Yet ultimately, it was the relationship between Jim and John Cherry that was key to Ernest's success. According to Sam's, Cherry would ask you to do anything, and Jim would try to do anything. Sam's believed that they were lucky to run into each other because each man was so essential to the other's success. Cherry was aware that a commercial would sometimes read funnier than what happened during filming. Other times, the opposite happened. A small change could make an average script work much better. He wouldn't try and push what was thought to be a funny premise if it just wasn't working. In addition, Cherry invited collaboration on the set, not only Jim and the writers, but anyone willing to speak up. Jim said once, everybody on the crew, even a grip, feels free to contribute to the commercials. Anybody can come up with the payoff line. The brainstorming got Ernest into some of the most ridiculous situations imaginable. From carving a turkey with a chainsaw to hanging upside down in a chimney dressed as Santa Claus. Jim said that there was even a dumb scale they had established for these sessions. One commercial known as Bobbing for Water where Ernest dunks his face into a large tub, was once at the top of the list. As popular as Ernest was becoming, Cherry was aware that the commercials remained far from a love at first sight experience for numerous television viewers. In Ernest's early years, Purity Dairies dealt with upset viewers after commercials aired showing Ernest taking a milk bath. Some customers threatened to boycott their products. One man who called complained, "A repulsive looking man in a tub of milk is anything but appetizing." Fortunately, Purity kept the ads going, and the viewers soon warmed to Ernest's antics. Similar scenarios played out many times over the years. Cherry continually assured clients that many of the same people who initially complained would later become some of Ernest's biggest fans. The businesses would see sales climb. In the end, TV stations and clients almost always ended up getting calls from the public asking when the commercials would air again. Even though some viewers would never be won over by Ernest, a growing client list proved that the numbers were in Ernest's favor. Cherry admitted of his creation, "Some people love him, some people hate him. Fortunately, more people love him." Cherry and Jim were asked repeatedly in interviews what their theories were for Ernest's immense popularity and staying power. Cherry took these subjects seriously. One aspect that Cherry mentioned in explaining why such an obnoxious character connected with people was the fact that he was vulnerable. Yeah. I mean, that is it. This allowed Ernest, despite his obnoxiousness, to generate enough empathy to win over audiences. In the end, everyone would laugh and perhaps identify with him in some way. Jim always thought that Ernest was just like someone everybody probably knew, be it friend, family member, co-worker, or neighbor. In a 2009 appearance on the Inside the Actor studio, actor-comedian Ricky Gervais discussed some of these very same qualities as they related to comedy. Gervais said, "The most important thing in comedy is empathy." He then continued, "Laurel and Hardy got it right 100 years ago, and it hasn't been improved on." Laurel and Hardy had been two of Jim's favorite comedians as a child, and Jim's expressive face and ability to connect with viewers helped bring about his own brand of empathy. And in one memorable Christmas commercial, a good amount of sympathy. The commercial "Love Thy Neighbor" aired in two parts within days of each other. The first showed Ernest being excluded from a Christmas party when Vern shutting the front door in Ernest's face. Many viewers called Carden and Cherry outraged that they would do something like that to poor old Ernest during the holidays. They had no idea that the upcoming second part showed Ernest nailing Vern in the face with a snowball while yelling, "Happy New Year, Vernon!" It was the upset reaction from viewers to Ernest being shut out that seemed to convince Cherry that Ernest was a sympathetic enough character to someday carry a feature-length film. Cherry also said once, "If you can find something that will entertain while it sells, you have a winner." Ernest's clients loved the fact that the commercials were not only original and funny, but created a strong positive product identification. Cream O'Weber Dairies once gave a viewer survey to test how well its Ernest commercials were connecting with viewers. They found that 96% remembered the character and 91% remembered the product. Whatever the premise of the commercial, and no matter how outrageous Ernest's actions, the product was always foremost in the spot. Other elements were at work in the Ernest commercials that benefited the client. Carden and Cherry capitalized on the local feel of each commercial by continuing to shoot most of them at Cherry's home. A comfortable setting that became familiar to the viewer over time. Yet although the commercials had a neighborhood feel, the location was unidentifiable. Since most of the products Ernest pushed were local or regional, it was easy for people living as far away as California to believe the commercials were being filmed around the corner with a local actor and crew. Many viewers came to believe that Jim was local to whatever area in which the commercials were airing. When Carden and Cherry caught on to this phenomenon, they kept quiet about Jim's true hometown during his personal appearances at client locations. Ernest's unpretentious nature was also gave viewers a certain level of comfort in whatever he was pushing on Vern. As annoying as Ernest could be, he had an underlying honesty and sincerity. Viewers trusted his message even if his actions were clumsy and intrusive. California car dealership owner John L. Sullivan, who used Ernest for years, once said, He's just a good old down-home individual you can believe. He isn't a suede shoe operator selling you a bill of goods." That was exactly the message Cherry hoped his clients and their customers were getting when they watched Ernest. John Cherry once said, "One of the best salesmen I ever knew told me the better part of what you were selling was security. You weren't selling the product, you were selling security." He said the salesman brought a teddy bear along with him when meeting with clients to illustrate that message. No matter how funny viewers thought Ernest to be, the very thought he was clever enough to pull one over on them. They never thought he was clever enough to pull one over on them. Cherry would laugh about that fact that Ernest could make almost anyone believe. "I may be at the bottom of the heap, but I'm above that guy." Both the anecdotal evidence and the financial data reaffirmed that Ernest was good for business. Cliff Cummings saw how Ernest helped sales after using the campaign at Tyson's Toyota dealership in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. He teamed up with Carden and Cherry again after taking over his own dealership in Fairfax, Virginia. Cummings once described how customers would say, "I want to buy my car because of Ernest." He further explained how his truck sales dramatically increased at the same time his car sales kept a steady pace. This was during a time when many other local dealerships were suffering. He realized that the advertising had to be responsible for much of his success. Meanwhile, in Indianapolis, a chain of ice cream parlors reported that banana split sales skyrocketed the week after advertising with Ernest. They sold almost 11,000 banana splits. They normally average 100 a week, plus the campaign ran in winter. Oh, wow. And according to Roy Leitner, senior marketing vice president at Carden and Cherry, Trouth Dairy in Newport, Kentucky saw a 10% increase in sales every year they used Ernest. Leitner laughed about the time the president of Trouth showed him a new addition to their plant, proclaiming, "This is what Ernest built." That's nice. When Ernest first became popular through his success with the dairies, Carden and Cherry never thought he would gain traction in markets beyond the Southeast, save for the Midwest, and that was a maybe. They were wrong. Ernest's humor proved to have no limits. Tom Sparks, an executive at Carden and Cherry, joked, "People up north love him, maybe because they think they're laughing at us." The agency was also surprised when a Hawaiian bank became interested in using the campaign. In addition to the bank airing the ads in Hawaii, it also had Ernest's voice dubbed in Japanese to enable them to run their commercials in Guam. Jim loved to joke about how much he enjoyed watching himself speak Japanese. Ernest had come a long way after an unspectacular start with a failing amusement park and a year on the shelf. But once the character got rolling, there wasn't anything he couldn't sell. From buttermilk to natural gas, Ernest was an expert on a variety of things he thought that Vern should be buying. One industry, however, proved a tougher sell at first, the TV news business. Ernest set out to conquer new territory. A news station's professionalism, or gravitas, was and is at the core of its appeal to viewers. Stations worried that using Ernest alongside television anchors to advertise the evening news could cause viewers to question the station's integrity. Even if newscasters retained their professional demeanor in the ads, the mere association with such a goofy character could raise questions about their journalistic abilities. Despite any initial concerns, many stations decided to sign Ernest to promote their newscasts. As the Ernest News promos began to debut in various markets, some newspapers responded as if their entire communities were being insulted. In one Cleveland newspaper article, the reporter was relentless in asking the sales manager of Cleveland's Channel 61 news station what was behind his decision to bring in the Ernest campaign. Perhaps as an attempt to appease the reporter, the sales manager confessed, "Ernest is more of a gimmick. He's not something you go with for a 4 or 5 year plan." In New Mexico, two competing news stations around Albuquerque wrestled with whether to go with Ernest. The one that chose to do so also placed Ernest's huge grin on dozens of billboards. The general manager of the competing station explained why he had passed. "It might go over in the Carolinas, but not here." In the spring of 1986, a TV management workshop was held at the National Association of Broadcasters convention in Dallas. One of the speakers was a promotion specialist who worked for CBS. During his speech, he criticized stations that had used the Ernest campaigns. Obviously, many in the TV news business still held on to the long-standing belief that a clown could sell cheeseburgers and fries, but not the primetime news at 5. But the results were in the numbers. Numerous news stations saw their ratings surge after running the Ernest campaigns. The success of the ads forced many of the companies in a variety of industries to rethink their dated man in three-piece suit approach. If a company was willing to take a risk and absorb some initial criticism, Ernest soon had them seeing dollar signs. Carden and Cherry realized they had hit the lottery with Ernest and were reaping the benefits of a 20-year payout compared to a one-time cash option. They repeatedly refused lucrative offers for a national campaign to avoid a quick burnout of the character. Their strategy of continued small market saturation would be nearly impossible today with the reach of the internet. Another advantage they had was the limited number of TV channels. Said Coke Sims, "When the commercials started gathering steam in most places, it was right before cable exploded. It was back when most any town had ABC, NBC, CBS, and public television, and that was about it. So it was a big deal to have local spots on the local news, local morning show, or whatever local programming. Of all the markets, basically we were selling to 3 channels." Carden and Cherry resisted other potential short-term payoffs to ensure ongoing success. John Cherry wouldn't reveal Vern's face on camera. Jim did once say, however, that he wanted to play the role of Vern if there was ever a decision to show him. Oh, that's a clever idea, I suppose. Yet despite Ernest's success, there was always a concern that a large-scale Ernest ad campaign for a big client would suffer the same fate as the Wendy's "Where's the Beef" commercials. The famous commercial showed 3 granny types standing at a fast food counter inspecting a hamburger. The humor in the contrast between the giant bun and in the tiny hamburger is so eclipsed by Clara Peller's character asking, "Where's the beef?" in her deep, raspy voice. Jim, who was always complimentary of his peers, told reporters Peller's timing was perfect, and she had a cute and innocent way of delivering it. Although funny and successful, the Wendy's campaign was over after a couple of years. One big advantage Ernest may have had was with his taglines, "Hey Vern," and "Know what I mean," were more general. "Where's the beef" was more of a punchline than a tagline, making it less adaptable for creating new ads. The success of Ernest, Peller auto mogul Joe Isuzu, and the fast talking Joe Mosqueda from the FedEx ads demonstrated how audiences were growing increasingly fond of a more comedic approach to TV marketing. Commercials played during the Super Bowl today consist almost entirely of humorous concepts and characters, but that wasn't always the case in the 1970s. In realizing what a hot commodity they possessed, Carden and Cherry became astute in understanding that worked, and that they did not hesitate to turn down clients they thought might set Ernest up for failure. They would not accept a client offer if the budget or creative freedom was lacking. They also insisted on retaining creative control. Cherry did not want to tinker with a formula that had such a track record. He would simply explain to the client, "It works. I don't know how, but it works." Wet my whistle here. The arrangement Carden and Cherry set up allowed the client to select from a large number of adaptable scripts that had been successful. Cherry remained conservative when it came to altering anything in Ernest's delivery. Ernest's now trademark catchphrases, "Hey Vern" and "Know what I mean," had become almost as popular as the character himself. Jim was soon being referred to as the "Hey Vern guy" almost as much as Ernest. As far as Ernest's appearance, only minor modifications by a client were permitted. The cap and vest became to Ernest what the leather jacket was to Fonzie on the TV sitcom Happy Days. Just as Fonzie wore his jacket at inappropriate times for comedic effect, like when he went water skiing in the infamous shark jumping episode, Ernest wore his cap and vest everywhere, from the shower to the swimming pool. Keeping the cap and vest on in the craziest of settings obviously added to the humor, but it also clearly identified a character who was becoming an extremely powerful brand. Cherry was really advertising two products at once. Throughout the entire life of the Ernest campaigns, the identifiable images of the character remained the khaki baseball cap and denim vest. While blue jeans and a gray t-shirt usually rounded out the outfit, the cap and vest rarely moved, said Jim. "We dressed Ernest in the gray t-shirt and blue jean vest like he'd gone to Kmart and bought out the blue light special. He said that the plain khaki baseball cap could sometimes be hard to find, but he usually could rely on JCPenney to keep him in stock." Product merchandising became at the request of clients. Companies were eager to find additional ways to capitalize on the positive association that Ernest had with their products. Soon, Carden and Cherry was able to sell quite a bit of merchandise by featuring Ernest without any client affiliation, selling merchandise solely on the power of Ernest's celebrity. Fans showed their adoration by snapping up greeting cards, bumper stickers, t-shirts, and pins. Just as Carden and Cherry was careful about how Ernest was presented on screen, the agency also made sure that any merchandise it licensed fit into the agency's kid-friendly approach. Now, Ernest truly was a commodity. Jim's ability to connect with his fans through his commercials was eclipsed only by the thrill he gave them through his many public appearances. Brahms Dairy, nationwide but based in Oklahoma, brought him in for tours twice a year, including visits to stores in cities like Tulsa and another big market, Dallas. His appearance created a backup so big on Interstate 635, Jim's driver had to maneuver onto the shoulder to get Jim there on time. One weekend in Columbia, South Carolina, he drew an estimated 5,000 people to a car dealership. Jim often stayed past the scheduled time to sign autographs. Perhaps no appearance demonstrated Jim's commitment to Ernest over his own ego more than a 1985 Christmas parade in Raleigh, North Carolina, for Pine State Dairies. He rode along the extremely long parade route dressed as Ernest while sitting atop a fake cow. His accessibility to fans added to the personal connection and local feel that the commercials conveyed. Oh, we got a bunch of pictures here. Oh, I missed that little comment. Well, this chapter is at an end. There are some pictures, but I guess I'm getting phone calls and there's people in the other room, so I guess we're just gonna call it here. Sorry about it, but all right, we'll talk to you later.